Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Welcome to Merryn Talks Your Money, the personal finance edition of Merryn Talks Money. And these bonus podcasts, we talk about the best strategies for making the most of your money. I'm Merryn Somerset Webb, and with me, as ever, senior reporter and money distilled author John Stepek. Hi, John.
Hi, Merryn.
Now, we are very lucky. Our very kind listeners do keep sending in questions. And so we have one we want to answer today, and do keep sending them in. The only thing I would say about this question is it is an excellent question. I don't want you to think for 1 second that it is not an excellent question, but it'd be easier for us to answer with a little more detail. And you will see that as I read it out. Okay, so here we go. Dear Merryn, very much enjoy your excellent podcast. Thank you very much, Robert. The letter comes from Robert. As everyone knows, the more you flatter us, the more likely you are to have your question answered, and that's exactly the way it should be. So anyway, very much enjoy your excellent podcast, and I have a question that may be of interest to discuss. It is much discussion over which fund and which market to invest in, but what is the actual data, say from the last 40 years of picking a mixed bag of funds and ETFs and investment trusts versus just putting it all in a low-cost Vanguard World Tracker or a combination of passive trackers? Now, you'll see there what I mean by a little more detail. What do we mean by a mixed bag of funds and ETFs and investment trusts? I mean, is that a random mixed bag? And if you have a big enough mixed bag, then in the end, it's going to pretty much hedge towards the performance of a tracker anyway. So it's difficult to look at that and come up with a clear answer. If you'd sent something in with to the specific funds or a specific type of fund or investment trust, then it would be easier to be clear. But nonetheless, the question remains valid. So onwards. So much discussion on which fund to purchase, but maybe it simply isn't necessary as fund managers only ever outperform for a few years. If you could send all your hate mail on that directly to John so I don't have to deal with that, fund managers, thank you very much. More from Robert. I'm an avid investor and I'm trying to advise my children, and as their timelines are longer, I want to give them good advice. Thank you, from Robert. So it is a great question. Basically, it's saying, is there any point in investing actively when you can just buy passively and be done with the whole thing? Now, John, what's the answer?
I mean, it's a really good question.
Yeah.
So Robert sort of was asking about the last 40 years. So I pulled up the Bloomberg terminal, which is very helpful for these things.
Super helpful. Everyone should have one.
Because I tend to think about asset allocation in like 4 pots. So like bonds, cash, gold and equities. Right, but if you're talking about a young person, and we're also talking about, let's just assume that your gold's going to be static, your bonds are going to be broadly static-ish, and your cash will be static-ish. So let's just focus on equities for this. So if you go back to 1987, because I couldn't quite get back to 86, but that's like pretty much 40 years. So the MSCI World Index, the one that includes emerging markets, and talking about sterling terms, it's returned roughly 9% a year in sterling over the last 40 years. And let's park inflation because that's not relevant to the discussion. We're just talking about, in nominal terms, that's what you would have had to have beaten with a mixed portfolio that you chose yourself to beat the global equity index tracker. And well, so let's look at a couple of good comparators. If you bought Scottish Mortgage Investment Trust in 1989, which is when it kind of came out, you'd have done almost 13% a year for about 8.5% for the tracker over that period.
Although there would be clear, have also been bad times to buy Scottish Mortgage.
Oh God, yeah. And if you'd bought, I mean, the best investor in the world, or the acknowledged best investor in the world, Warren Buffett, if you'd bought Berkshire Hathaway in 1987, you'd have managed 16.5% a year, which is obviously a lot more than 9%. I mean, that's pretty tasty. But I think your basic problem here is that there's so many other things. I mean, like for example, I think someone could conceivably have put all of their equity money into Berkshire Hathaway and not felt uncomfortable about that in 1987 because Warren Buffett already had this amazing reputation. I certainly don't think any sensible investor would have put 100% of their equity allocation into Scottish Mortgage Trust in 1989. I can see that might have happened when it hit big, and people might have thought, James Anderson, etc., is like the best fund manager in the world. I'm going to put, but I don't think that would be advisable, and I don't think most people would have thought like that. So I guess I'm making the point that beating 9% a year through active management would have been a challenge, I think, over the last 40 years. Which is not to say that passive is definitely going to do better over the next 40, but it's quite a high hurdle.
It certainly is. And the only thing I would say about that is if you're just buying, one passive fund and you're buying global index, there's a lot going on there that we've talked about a lot over the last few years. Is that first, you're effectively a momentum investor. You didn't mean to be, but you are. That's worked very well for a period of time, but it won't necessarily keep working. You're also very overexposed to the US, and you're very overexposed to the technology sector in the US in particular. And again, maybe that's fine, and it's been fine for a while, but one of the things that everybody talks about on the pod, and John, you write about, and I write about, is this idea that we are now at the beginning, in the foothills of a great rotation away from tech, probably away from the US being the biggest and greatest market everywhere. Not that it'll stop being great, but that it might stop being less great relative to its competitors. So it may be that style of passive, effectively momentum investing doesn't work quite as well over the next 20, 30 years as it has over the previous. And the other thing is, if you're not doing that, i.e. you're not being a simple one-stop shop passive investor using a global index ETF like that, there is no such thing as passive investing. Because you have to choose your ETFs, you have to choose your markets, you still have to do your own asset allocation. And once you're doing that, you're already into the whole world of active. There is no such thing. There is a combination of passive trackers, but there's no such thing as a passive combination of passive trackers. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
everything is active.
Yeah.
Everything is active. And even going fully passive is an active decision to be a US tech-heavy momentum investor. Yeah. That's been a great decision for a long time. Will it still be a great decision? And this is why this question is it's fairly unanswerable. It's fairly unanswerable. And one thing you can do is to not go into a market cap tracker, i.e. where you've got more in the biggest companies, so you are very much a momentum investor, and to go into an equal weighted tracker, not nearly so easy to get, by the way, whereby you're not a momentum investor because you hold each constitute of the index in equal weight. So it's a different way to do passive, and it's a non-momentum way to do passive because your holdings are constantly being rebalanced. So you are effectively a passive value investor.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's useful, because you're absolutely right about the asset allocation side of things, because I was looking at, again, the global index tracker we were just talking about. So in 1987, it had about 30% of its assets in the US, and now it's 61%. Whereas in the late 1980s, it had actually about 40% in Japan, and now that's down to just over 5%. So I think one starting point, if you were turning around just now and saying, right, well, do I want to go fully passive, or do I want to go slightly more active? You could look at the allocation, or the global allocation, and perhaps also the sector allocation that the global tracker has got, and then figure out, how am I going to be different to that as a starting point? So what is it about this? If I think I can beat this, what would I do differently to the global tracker? Should I have more in, for example, UK stocks? Should I have 20% instead of 3%? Should I boost my exposure to specific emerging markets, perhaps emerging markets that exclude China, or that sort of thing? And should I maybe have a quarter of my portfolio in the US rather than the full thing? And then again, within that, you can turn around and say, right, well, which of these should be equal weighted and which should be kind of momentum or sort of market cap weighted? So I think it's a useful reference point to at least know what the global tracker looks like.
Yeah. Okay. Lots to think about there. I think that's probably enough before, instead of answering the question, we make everybody even more confused. But I suspect this is something that we'll come back to, because John and I talk a lot about passive investing, active investing, which way you want to go, and how each one fits the environment around it. So more to come on that, definitely. Robert, thank you so much for your question. It was a great question. And other listeners, please do send in your questions. Remember the flattery at the beginning if you want them answered. Thanks for listening to this week's Merryn Talks Your Money. If you like our show, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to follow me and John on X or Twitter at MerrynSW and John_Stepek. This episode was produced by Summer Sadi and Moses Andam. Questions and comments on this show and all our shows are always welcome. Our show email is merrynmoney@bloomberg.net.